Yields back. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your service to our country under some pretty difficult circumstances. And we're certainly grateful. I'm certainly grateful. The people of the state that I represent, Colorado, are grateful to the 38,000 members of the FBI team, as you have articulated, that are working every day to keep the American people safe and to keep the people of my state and my community safe. So we're grateful for you being here. This committee obviously has a legitimate role in terms of conducting oversight. Generally, that oversight has extended to the policy areas, the areas of law enforcement that, of course, you are responsible for. Unfortunately, much of the conversation today, and it's disappointing, I think, for those Americans who have been watching, has not been focused on those legitimate areas of inquiry, but instead conspiracy theories and the like. Obviously, as you have been given an opportunity to respond to some of the attacks that have been made against the law enforcement agency that you direct, and the dangerous calls, or at least in my view, the dangerous calls have been made by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in terms of defunding federal law enforcement, which is deeply dangerous, and you've articulated the many reasons why. I'd like to focus in on two areas that are important to my constituents in Colorado and that I believe are relevant to the work that you do, and that is the fentanyl epidemic and gun violence prevention. With respect to the latter, you may recall you testified in front of the committee previously. I had an opportunity to ask you about an incident that occurred back in 2020 in my state in Colorado. In 2021, the GAO issued a report in response to this particular incident. Just by way of background, a gun dealer in Colorado transferred a firearm to an 18-year-old resident of Florida without first verifying the purchaser's age, eligibility, and her state of residence. The gun buyer then threatened to commit a school shooting akin to the mass tragedy that occurred at Columbine High, causing the lockdown and closure of multiple schools in my district back in Colorado. The report recommended, the GAO report, that the FBI strengthen its system for the sale of firearms to out-of-state purchasers. Specifically, it recommended that the FBI update the NICS system to verify the age requirements of an out-of-state firearm purchaser in both the purchaser's state of residence and the state of sale to ensure basic age eligibility. And we've introduced legislation that I believe the Department of Justice is aware of to make that requirement statutory. Wonder if you could expound a bit on whether I'm sure you're aware of the report, whether the FBI has implemented the recommendation that the GAO has made, and if not, the FBI's plans to do so.
Well, I think the specific legislation that would require that is something, as you said, that I think the department is studying, and so I can't weigh in on a specific legislative proposal. When it comes to the specific issue of 18 to 20-year-olds in particular and gun purchases, that is, of course, the subject of the bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was passed. And there are a number of significant checks that now occur. We started implementing that last October, fully implemented it starting in January. And that provides for enhanced checks for that critical population, the 18 to 20-year-old range, juvenile criminal records, mental health records for that population, and contact, in some ways, most importantly, contact with local law enforcement in that person's community. And I've actually been out to NICS, met with and sat with the operators who process those checks. So I've seen kind of firsthand how it works and the important work it represents. And I think if you were to talk, I'm talking to chiefs and sheriffs all over this country every week, and you will hear from most of them, if you talk to them for very long, you will hear about their concern and our concern about juveniles and violence. I almost guarantee you within the first 10 minutes of any conversation. It's a real problem in this country.
Well, I thank you for your answer, and I think it underscores the importance of the NICS program, and would look forward to perhaps following up with your team on this particular administrative issue of trying to just make sure that the database is working efficiently. Limited time left, but I just want to give you an opportunity. I know we've talked a bit about the fentanyl epidemic devastating communities across the country, certainly in Colorado. It's one of the reasons why we created a fentanyl prevention caucus here in the Congress. It's bipartisan. Representative Issa is one of our co-chairs. Wonder if you just might be able to, for those Americans who are watching, kind of provide us with your sense of some of the trends, the most dangerous and disturbing trends that you think the American people and policymakers should be aware of.
Well, I will say there are a whole bunch of trends, but in the limited time, but because of the importance of this topic, I'll hit a couple. One is, and we were just discussing this recently internally, we are finding over the course of the last year that, maybe even a little less than a year, that almost every gang takedown we have now, and we're doing them all over the country all the time, almost every single one now seems to involve as well a seizure of fentanyl. And we've been doing gang takedowns since Congresswoman Lee was a prosecutor as well. So that's not new. But what is new is that over and over and over again, it seems consistently we're finding fentanyl in these, again, these are violent crime takedowns. The second phenomenon, which is deeply disturbing, and I know the DEA administrator is very concerned about as well, is that we're seeing more and more adulteration or lacing of fentanyl into all sorts of different kinds of prescription drugs that lots of Americans take all the time. And if you think about the phenomenon of the youth of this country, which is itself a problem of getting prescription drugs from their friends or their friends' parents or whatever it happens to be, they may not know that there's potentially a lethal dose of fentanyl in some prescription drug that they're taking. So it just underscores the importance of only getting your prescriptions from an appropriate medical provider.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Is the southern border secure?
I think the southern border represents a massive security threat.
So what we've heard from you today is that fentanyl has become a really big problem and that you're having to put more resources to it. Is that correct?
Towards fentanyl, yes. Yes, we are.
And the related gangs. I mean, you just retailed some of the story.
Right.
So this all happened over the last couple of years as the border has become unsecure. Is the southern border secure?
Well, again, we're not. I want to defer to the Homeland Security, which is responsible for the physical security of the building. I will just tell you from the FBI's perspective that we are seeing all sorts of very serious criminal threats that come from across the border.
And getting worse, correct? You're putting more assets towards it?
We certainly do. We have, as I
So
said,
it's becoming more of a priority for you.
It is becoming more and more of a priority for us.
So in the Durham report, and we heard from Mr. Durham just a couple weeks ago, he said the FBI failed to uphold the important mission of strict fidelity to the law, and that predates you. Do you agree with that statement that Mr. Durham made?
Yes, I do.
Was Russia collusion a hoax? So in light of the Durham report and that, was Russia collusion a hoax?
What I would say is this. One as to the Durham report itself, and one as to the issue of Russia malign influence. As to the Durham report itself,
Be quick.
I will try. The conduct it describes is conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative of who I see the FBI as every day and must not ever be allowed to happen again.
And on the other side?
Second, on the other one, it is not seriously disputed that the Russians, among other foreign adversaries, have attempted to interfere in our elections. And there have been any number of findings to that. In fact, President Trump himself rightly declared a national emergency about foreign interference in our elections in 2018.
So as a result of the actions of James Comey, the disgraced James Comey, and the FBI, they've interfered with the elections in both 2016 and 2020. Will that interference happen again in 2024 by the FBI?
The FBI is not going to be interfering in elections.
They did in 2016.
Well, I don't know that that's what Mr. Durham found. What I would tell you again is that there was conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative.
You can be in denial if you want to.
I'm not in denial,
Mr. Drake,
sir.
you can be in denial on this. That's exactly what happened. Last year, the FBI gave a defensive briefing to my home state Senator Johnson, and you can see the slide up there now. And then that defensive briefing was leaked to the Washington Post. Who ordered that briefing?
So defensive briefings, when it comes to election matters, including in the last administration, under a procedure set up by the last administration, are an interagency process coordinated by the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And the way that works is the interagency concludes that a defensive briefing is appropriate, and the FBI is given information from whatever intelligence community agency supplies it, and then we provide it. Defensive briefings, it's important to understand.
Senator Johnson, that's his quote. He's up there with you and Hunter Biden. I knew it was a setup. And he asked you this question back in November of last year, and he said, I knew it was a setup. And that goes back to the point about interfering in elections. Senator Johnson was one of the most vulnerable Republican incumbents, if not the most vulnerable Republican incumbent, that was a target of the Democrats in the 2022 election. And then you see this briefing happen, and he knew what was happening, that there was someone or some people within the FBI and the intelligence arena that were going after him. Did Joe Biden take payments from Burisma or any other foreign companies as vice president, president, or private citizen Biden?
As you may know, there is an ongoing investigation being led by the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, Mr. Weiss, appointed by President Trump in the last administration, that our Baltimore field office is working with, and I would refer you to him as to what, if anything, can be shared.
So the president is under investigation.
I'm not going to confirm or speak to who is or isn't under investigation for what. I'm simply going to
So he's not under investigation?
I didn't say that either. By long-standing department policy and practice, I'm not going to be confirming or denying who is or isn't under investigation or for what.
Thank you. I'll close with this. Russia collusion started it, Mr. Chairman, and the targeting and the suppression and the censorship has continued until this point. We need to thoroughly review what the FBI is doing, and at a minimum, I will be allowing FISA to sunset if we're not going to see significant reforms in the agency. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Wray, for your service and your patience. In 2018, 10 leaders of Temple Beth Or, a synagogue in my district, received threats mailed to their homes. These threats led to the cancellation of programming and continued a disturbing trend of rising anti-Semitism in North Carolina. In the years since, my state has confronted new threats from domestic terrorists at minority institutions. This past April, a man was arrested on the campus of North Carolina A&T State University, the largest HBCU in the country, with multiple firearms and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, as well as a makeshift explosive, brass knuckles, crossbow, knives, and other weapons. Thankfully, this man was arrested before he could cause any harm, but the threat he posed to the campus mirrors threats we've seen to HBCUs around the country. In North Carolina and across the United States, we've also seen increased threats against reproductive care providers in the wake of the Dobbs decision last summer. And North Carolina recently enacted a 12-week abortion ban that has severely restricted access to reproductive health care in my state, and people often have to go through threatening crowds to be able to access the care that they need. While some in North Carolina have highlighted vandalism of crisis pregnancy centers since the overturn of Roe, they failed to acknowledge or respond to the increase in violence at abortion providers. Does the FBI currently provide anti-terrorism training to civilians, to HBCUs, places of worship, religious centers, individuals providing abortion services, LGBTQ groups, and does that training include a domestic terrorism component so that they can help you and law enforcement?
Well, we do a whole bunch of things to engage with the community, institutions that are targeted with violence, that include a number of the kinds of institutions you mentioned. I know in particular we work very, very closely with the Jewish community, which has the unfortunate distinction of, despite the percentage that they represent of the American population, of being way disproportionately targeted. So we spend a lot of time engaging with them around the country and nationally. We also spent a lot of time engaging with campus law enforcement, including at HBCUs. We spent a lot of time on that, especially last year with the bomb threats that were coming in. I was just recently with all of the campus law enforcement leaders from around the country just the last couple of weeks. And we certainly try to provide awareness to different kinds of institutions about how to deal with potential mass casualty events and things like that. We also provide information about things to be on the lookout for in people's communities. I should say, though, when you mention on the abortion side, reproductive facilities, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't also point out that there has been a pretty significant uptick in violence going the other way since the Dobbs decision. And in fact, most of the investigations that we've opened since the Dobbs decision, probably about 70% of them have been violence against pro-life facilities. We recently had a significant charge in the Madison, Wisconsin area of a guy who was trying to firebomb a pro-life facility there. So we're out there with communities across the spectrum.
Okay. And how would an investigation differ if it's domestic terrorism as opposed to just an ordinary criminal case?
Well, our investigation focuses on the violence first and foremost. I think there is no domestic terrorism statute. There's no offense of domestic terrorism, but we define domestic terrorism for purposes of opening an investigation as having three things: violence or threat of violence, in furtherance of an ideology. In other words, that's what's driving the violence in that particular instance, and in violation of federal criminal law. If we have those three things, enough evidence to indicate that that might be what's going on, then we would treat that as a domestic terrorism investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Lady yields back. We got votes, Director. We're going to do one more on our side, then we'll take a break and come back for the remaining members. The gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Yes, Director Wray, we have established that the FBI and other federal agencies met weekly with executives from major social media companies, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn, and Yahoo and Verizon. Were you involved in any of those meetings, yes or no?
I wasn't involved in the kind of meetings that you're talking about, or I didn't participate, I guess, in meetings like that.
Okay. Are these meetings still occurring, and if so, how frequently?
Well, right now, as you may know, there is a preliminary injunction that's been entered.
Prior to the preliminary injunction, were these weekly meetings taking place?
I don't know if weekly meetings occurred, again, before the injunction, but certainly we've been very open about this, engaged with social media companies.
Does the FBI intend to continue to have such meetings leading up to the 2024 election to police election-related speech?
Well, we're not going to be policing election-related speech.
That's what you previously did.
I do not agree with that description.
Okay, well, here's what I would say. This committee has learned that the FBI acted to, quote, discredit leaked information about Hunter Biden before and after it was published, that, quote, Twitter's contact with the FBI was constant and pervasive, and as if it were a subsidiary, and that, quote, a surprisingly high number are requests by the FBI for Twitter to take action on election misinformation, even involving joke tweets from low follower accounts. Are you aware that that has been reported?
I am aware of some of what the committee has found in its report, but I will add that I'm not sure I agree with the findings.
But that's what we found. Director Way, you and I both know that the federal government is forbidden from doing indirectly what it cannot do directly. In other words, neither you nor the FBI have any legal authority to circumvent the First Amendment by using a surrogate to do your dirty work. Yet that is exactly what you have been doing. The Bureau, under your watch, has been using proxies to violate the First Amendment. Were you the person who gave the orders to use these social media companies to violate violate Americans' First Amendment rights?
Again, I don't agree with your description of our engagement with social media companies.
So who made the decision to use social media companies as a proxy to suppress the First Amendment rights of American citizens?
Because I don't believe that's what we did, I'm not sure there's anyone that would have made such a decision.
Do you really expect the American public to believe that you were not involved in the decisions related to using social media companies to suppress the First Amendment rights of American citizens?
I can't help what people will believe or not. I can only speak to what the facts are.
Was anyone ever fired or otherwise reprimanded for pursuing mass censorship? In other words, has anybody been held accountable for taking the actions that were described in the decision by the district court out of Louisiana?
Well, the district court's decision just came out on July 4th.
Has anybody been reprimanded or held accountable?
And at the moment, we have issued guidance to everyone in the organization who could be affected as to how to follow that.
Has anyone been reprimanded?
I'm not going to speak to personnel matters because we have not made any such determination at this stage.
Mr. Ray, I have some letters from Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul that were sent to you on April 20th and June 20th requesting a meeting to discuss the Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate's work investigating the origins of SARS COVID-19. Your office has never responded to these letters. Do you intend to respond to Senators Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul to find out more information about the origin of COVID-19?
Well, we try hard to respond to all correspondence we get from the Hill. We get a lot.
So I
I'll have to
assume you'll
check.
be responding to
My
this.
intention is that we would have an appropriate response. Sometimes our responses, by longstanding procedure, our responses have to go through the department before they go out. So it could be that it's held up there, but I don't know that that's.
So
I don't know if that's the case in these particular ones.
Senators Graham and Paul should be receiving a response from
Some
your
kind of
office
response.
pretty soon. Okay.
As you may know, we were the only agency in the intelligence community until more recently when the Department of Energy did as well to reach the assessment that in our folks' view, we thought
I
it was
understand,
more likely
Mr.
to be a
Ray.
lab leak.
Okay. Mr. Ray, from the Twitter files, Missouri versus Biden disclosures, the Durham investigation and report, and exposure and collapse of the Russian collusion hoax, the American people fully understand that there is a two-tiered justice system that has been weaponized to persecute people based on their political beliefs, and that you have personally worked to weaponize the FBI against conservatives. I asked Mr. Durham about this, to which he answered, "I don't think that things can go too much further with the view that law enforcement, particularly the FBI or Department of Justice, runs a two-tiered system of justice. The nation can't stand under those circumstances." Director Ray, what are you prepared to do to reform federal law enforcement in a manner which earns back the trust of the American people?
Well, first off, I would disagree with your characterization of the FBI and certainly your description of my own approach. The idea that I'm biased against conservatives seems somewhat insane to me, given my own personal background. As to how we are approaching our work of protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution, it starts with me having emphasized to all of our folks over and over and over again in everything we do that we need to do the right thing in the right way, and that means following the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it. It starts, then goes on from there to all kinds of enhanced procedures, safeguards, approvals, double checks, triple checks, record-keeping requirement, accountability policies, funding of new functions like an Office of Internal Audit that didn't exist before, the installation of an entirely new leadership team from my predecessor, and where I can take action, where we can take action to hold people accountable by removing people from the chain of command.
Gentleladies, time has expired, Director. We're going to take a 30-minute break for votes. We will be back. I'm going to try to start right at 2:15.
Unanimous consent to introduce
Without
to
objection.
the record.
Without objection, so be entered. We'll start with Ms. Bush and then Mr. Bishop on our side when we return. We'll stand in recess for approximately 30 minutes.